Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to talk through the grammar of chapter 23, and I'm also going to give you a quick intro to the Hebrew Binyan system, the system of verb patterns. So starting out at the beginning of chapter 23, let's quickly go over our vocabulary. At the top of the right-hand column, we have our first word, which is beged, begadim. Beged is the generic word for garment, cloth, or clothing. It can be used for any kind of clothing. Next up, we have a new verb, bikesh. To bikesh is to seek or to inquire. Um, this can be to look for an object or a person, or this can be to seek an answer from somebody. Next up, we have berech. Berech is to bless. After that, we have the verb diber. Diber means to speak. We already know another verb for speaking, amar, but we'll see that diber is just about as common as amar is. Next up, we have an important sort of conjunction word, lama'an. Lama'an means in order that or for the sake of. So if you want to say somebody did something in order to have some result, you will frequently use lama'an to say that. Next up, we have a verb that's a little bit of a review, safar. Safar, as we know, means to count. They also now give us this verb in the PL. We'll learn what that is a little later in the chapter. But in the PL, this verb is siper, to recount or tell. So same verb root, slightly modified meaning. Now at the top of the left-hand column, we have the noun petach. You can see that petach is related to our noun, our verb patach, which is to open. So a petach is an opening or an entrance. This can be an opening in a wall, this can be the door of a house, this can be the entrance of a temple. Any of these things can be a petach. Next up, we have the verb tzivah. Tzivah means to command or order. This is a very, very common word in Biblical Hebrew. Unfortunately, as you can see, it is both second and third week, and so its vowel pattern is going to be weird. Next up, we have a noun, ra'av. Ra'av means famine or hunger. You can think about being ravenously hungry. And you can also see kind of the ra in there. This isn't actually related to the word ra, but you can see that this is a bad word. Next up, we have another review verb, shavar. Shavar, as we know, means to break. In the PL, we have shiber. Shiber in the PL is to shatter, to smash, or to destroy. So you can see the two meanings are related, but something a little bit different is going on. Next up, we have another review verb. We have the verb shalach. Shalach, we know, means to send. In the PL, however, shilech is going to mean to set free or send away permanently. So once again, we see that we have the same verb root, two different verb patterns, slightly different meaning. And then finally, we have the adverb tamid. Tamid means continually or regularly. Now, as you can see from this word list, something is going to be going on with verbs this chapter. So we had safar, siper, we had shavar, shiber, we had shalach, shilech, and we saw that while there's shared meaning between them, there's also some change in the meaning. What in the world is going on with this? Well, as you can see from the labels that they're giving you after these verbs, pa'al, pl, there is another layer to the Hebrew verbal system beyond the perfect, imperfect, and preterite, beyond our timeless verbs. There's another layer in the Hebrew verbal system, which is what makes the Semitic verbal system so different from Indo-European and so much fun. So this additional layer is sometimes described as different verb patterns. Sometimes people will call this different stems. The actual Hebrew name of this is a binyan, with the plural being binyanim. Let me change to a different shared item here. Stop share. Now let's share down here and now share. There we go. Okay. So in Biblical Hebrew, there are 5 major binyanim or stems or verb patterns or verb templates. You can think of these with any of those terms. The term I'm going to be using throughout the quarter is binyan, with the plural being binyanim. What is the deal here? Well, all of the verbs that we have learned so far are in what is known as the pa'al or call binyan. So our shamarti, shamarta, shamart, our eshmor, tishmor, tishmari, yishmor, all of these are all in the pa'al binyan. The pa'al binyan is just the basic binyan. There's no special variation in meaning. It just does what it's going to do. So if we have the verb shamar, for example, shamar, he guarded, yishmor, he will guard, we are already familiar with all of that. Now, in Biblical Hebrew, there are actually 4 more major binyanim and then quite a few more sort of minor binyan variations. In this textbook, we're only going to worry about the 5 major binyanim, and we'll sort of pick up the other variations as needed next quarter. What's going on with the other binyanim? We're not going to go to the PL next. Almost everybody lists the PL as number 2. I think that's a terrible decision because the PL is actually quite complicated in terms of its meaning. So let's think next about what is called the Hithiel binyan. The Hithiel binyan. The Hithiel binyan has a characteristic shape. It adds hays to the beginning of things. It puts yods between the second and third root letter. And so it's visually, you can recognize it. In terms of its meaning, the Hithiel is your causative binyan. So if you have a pa'al verb, shamar, he guarded, then in the Hithiel, your verb hishmir is he caused someone to guard. If your pa'al verb malach was he ruled, your PL verb himlich would be he caused someone to rule. If your pa'al verb was zachar, he remembered, then your Hithiel verb hizkir would be he caused someone to remember. So the Hithiel is going to add a causative meaning. After the Hithiel, we have what is called the Nephal binyan. The Nephal. The Nephal is going to have a characteristic nun at the beginning, or else assimilated in, as you can see here. It also has a characteristic vowel pattern. The Nephal is your passive binyan in Biblical Hebrew. So if your pa'al was he guarded, then your Nephal is he was guarded. If your pa'al was he ruled, then your Nephal is it was ruled. So you can see how that is happening. In the Hithiel, we're adding a causative meaning, and the Nephal, we're adding a passive meaning. Next up, let's talk about the heat payel. The heat payel. The heat payel is extremely easy to recognize. It's going to have a characteristic heat at the beginning, or an et or teat or yeet in the imperfect. So they're very easy to recognize again. The heat payel is the least common of our Binyanim, and it does a lot of different things. So, depending on what your verb is, the heat pile verb can be reflexive, reciprocal, or iterative. Now, what does that mean? A verb is reflexive when the subject of the verb is acting on themselves. So, I washed myself. I guarded myself. I ruled myself. I remembered myself. I thought about myself. Whatever the case may be, if the subject is acting on itself, that's a reflexive verb. Now, what does reciprocal mean? Reciprocal happens when you have a plural subject where the different beings that make up the subject are acting on one another. So we hugged each other, we fought each other, we remembered each other, we guarded each other. Those would all be reciprocal meanings. So that would be associated again with the heat pile. Finally, the heat pile can also be iterative. That means that you're doing something multiple times. So I guarded repeatedly. I repeatedly fought somebody. I walked back and forth repeatedly. Those would all be options. Now, specific verbs tend to have one of these three meanings in the heat pile, and you just kind of have to learn what they are, unfortunately. But you'll at least know when you see a heat pile, this is probably going to be reflexive, reciprocal, or iterative. Now, back to the PO, which is what we have going on in chapter 23 here. The PO is actually the most complicated of the Binyanim. So the PL, like the other Binyanim, is going to have a kind of characteristic shape. Here, it's not about a characteristic prefix put on here, like the Hiphil has its hey prefix, the Nephal has its noon prefix, the Heatpal has its heat prefix. And the PL, that's not what's going on. Instead, you're going to have a characteristic vowel pattern, and you're also going to have this dog-ish in the second root letter. More on that shortly. But so the PL has a characteristic shape. The PL, in terms of what it does to the meaning of verbs, basically has two paths that it can take. It can either give a verb what is called a factitive meaning, or it can give it what is called an intensive meaning. Now, what in the world is that about? Let's scroll down. Before I explain what factitive and intensive are, I want to make sure that you know another set of terms. So in language, we have these terms intransitive and transitive. An intransitive verb, so a not transitive verb, is a verb that does not want to have a direct object. So if we think, for example, if I say I walked, that's a perfectly fine, complete sentence. The verb there did not need a direct object. I can just say I walked, I ran, whatever kind of verb you can think of that doesn't really want a direct object, that's an intransitive verb. A transitive verb, on the other hand, does want to have a direct object. So if you think of the sentence, Jonathan hit the ball, that's a happy sentence. It's got a direct object. We know who's doing the hitting. We know what's being hit. If I just say Jonathan hit, you're like, well, Jonathan hit what? Where's the direct object? The verb hit wants to have a direct object. So the verb hit is a transitive verb. It wants a direct object. Now, intransitive and transitive, you could think of this as just a kind of binary thing where either the intransitive verb, it just doesn't have a direct object. The transitive verb just has a direct object. But transitivity is a little more complicated than that. For our purposes, the thing we want to know is the more the direct object of a transitive verb is affected by the verbal action, the more transitive the verb is. So, for example, If I say, I saw my friend, I saw my friend. You've got a subject, you've got a verb, you've got a direct object. And you did kind of want to have a direct object, saw wants to have a direct object. This is a transitive sentence with a transitive verb. However, in a sentence like, I saw my friend is not really being affected by the fact that I am looking at them. So this is technically a transitive sentence, but it's a very low transitivity transitive sentence. On the other hand, if I say, I ate the apple, we've got again a direct object, so this is a transitive sentence, but that apple has been completely chomped up, like there is no apple anymore. It's been completely unapplified. So that apple has been completely affected by the act of eating. So that is a very transitive sentence. Okay? So we've learned some terms. We've learned transitive. This is when your verb wants a direct object. Intransitive, your verb doesn't want a direct object. And we've learned that the more the direct object is affected by the verb, the more transitive your sentence is. Okay, now that we know that, we can talk about these two uses of the PL, the factitive and intensive. Okay, the first meaning we want to deal with is the factitive meaning of the PL. Basically, the idea of this is if you have a verb in the pa'al that was kind of intransitive, even to the point of being stative. So, like, I am strong, I am big, I am green. Those are all verbs in Biblical Hebrew. So, say I have I am strong, okay, in the pa'al. I am strong, it's intransitive, it's just describing a state. What the PL is going to do is going to take this from I am strong to I make someone or something strong. So we're taking it from being this intransitive stative to being a transitive verb. So this is the first use of the PL, this factitive. I am strong to I make strong. I am old to I make old. I am green to I make green. So in this case, what the PL is doing is extremely predictable. We know that if we have this kind of stative pa'al, this is what the PL is going to do. It's going to turn it from I am to I make, whatever the thing is. Now, the intensive is a little bit trickier. Basically, the intensive use of the PL is what happens if you have a pa'al verb, a basic verb, which is already transitive. It already wants a direct object. And then you put that into the PL. What in the world is going to happen? Well, we just learned that there's a way for things to be more transitive. So the more the direct object is affected by the verbal action, the more transitive it is. Okay? So, for example, if you have the pa'al verb shavar, to break, you know, maybe I broke this jar, maybe I can glue it back together, it has a crack in it, I don't know, it might not be that serious. If we take this verb and we make it shiber in the PL, it's no longer just a broken jar, it is shattered. It is in a zillion pieces on the ground. You are not putting that thing back together. It is much more intensely affected. If we take the verb shalach, shalach we know is to send. If we take our pa'al verb shalach, but we put it in the PL, shilech, it's no longer just to send, where maybe I could get the thing back if I want to. It's shilech. It's I send away permanently. So the thing that you're sending is being more affected. You can't get it back. It is being sent out permanently. What other verbs do they give you? none else that are particularly helpful from this context. Anyway, so here we see that your transitive pa'al verb becomes more transitive in the PL. So we get this more intense meaning. Now, the problem here is that while we can predict that the verb will be more transitive in the PL, we can't necessarily predict in what way it will be more transitive. So there are a lot of different ways to affect the direct object. So maybe the PL will mean that you do the action multiple times, that you do an action more successfully, that you do an action more permanently. But you can't necessarily predict which one it will be for a given verb. So once again, you kind of have to learn for specific verbs what they're going to do in the PL. All right, so we have learned about the 5 major binyanim in Biblical Hebrew, and we have learned a bit more specifically about what's going on with the meaning of the PL. I want to point out 2 more things about this. First, not all verbs appear in every binyan. A lot of verbs only appear in 2 or 3 of these binyanim. In particular, very few verbs will appear in both the PL and the Hifiel. That doesn't really seem to be a thing that happens very often. Let's see here. Number 2, not all verbs have a pa'al. And this is where things become a little more tricky. So if you learn a verb that just doesn't have a pa'al at all, like the verb diber, to speak, or the verb bikesh, to seek, it doesn't even have a pa'al. So then trying to work this through and be like, okay, the hifiel should be the causative of the pa'al. Well, there is no pa'al. Or the PL should be maybe the intensive of the pa'al. Well, there is no pa'al. So that's kind of the other wrinkle to this problem. Okay, so that's the 5 major binyanim. Let's go ahead and look at the rest of chapter 23 here in our textbook. So they go through, they talk about the intensification and repetition that you can get. They don't explain what's going on at all. You can just kind of ignore that. Now, here is the full chart for the PL, using the verb diber as the model, because unfortunately, shamar doesn't actually exist in the PL. Okay, so if we look at these forms, we can see that as usual, we're going to get a characteristic vowel pattern, and we're going to get a characteristic shape to our kind of verb root. So in the PL, what's going to happen? If we look at our perfects, let's look at our perfects. First thing I want you to notice this dog-ish in the second root letter. This is a crucial part of the PL binyan. If you look through this whole chart, you will see that every single form, perfect, imperfect, participle, imperative, infinitive, they all have that dog-ish in the second root letter. That is the big waving flag to tell you this is a PL verb. Now they also have characteristic vowel stuff going on here. So you can see in the perfect, we're going to get a hirek vowel in our first syllable, which is not what we would get in the pa'al, right? So here we're going to get dibarti, dibarta, dibart, diber, dibra, dibarnu, dibartem, dibarten, dibru, dibru. Notice you can really see down here, this is not a beged kefet dog-ish, nothing like that. This is the dog-ish of the PL. Okay? So we're getting this characteristic E in the first syllable, and then we can see that here in the third singular, we're getting a tsere vowel. The PL likes E vowels and tsere vowels. It likes them quite a bit. So this is going to be our characteristic pattern. In the imperfect, what is going to happen? In the imperfect, once again, we have our dog-ish in the second root letter, very important, and it's going to usually have this tsere vowel after the second root letter. So anytime you don't have a suffix being added to this thing, you're going to get that serif vowel. So you can see the ada bear, tida bear, the yida bear, tida bear, nida bear. So anytime you're not adding a suffix, you're going to get that serif vowel as well. Now the other thing to look for is to look at the prefixes. So we've still got our same old addit and addit prefixes, but here, instead of getting shmore, tish, more, here we're getting shevas and a reduced potok up here with the aleph because the aleph is a guttural letter. So look for the sheva under the prefix. So we're going to get ada bear, tida bear, tida bri, yida bear, tida bear, nida bear, tida bru, tida berna, yida bru, tida berna. So you can see, again, we've got this characteristic shape. Now what's going on with our other forms? Let's start with our imperatives, our command forms. Just as in the pa'al, the way you make your command forms is you start with your imperfect forms and you just bring them over and take the tav off. So in the singular, we get da bear, speak, da bri, speak. And in the plural, we're going to get da bru, speak, da berna, speak. So that's very easy. The one thing I do want to point out is look at this da bear and look at this d bear. Students often get these confused. So watch out for that. Vowels are important. The infinitives, they are just going to be da bear again. So lida bear or bida bear or kida bear or da bear for the infinitive absolute or infinitive of emphasis. That's just the shape it's going to be. So it's very easy to tell that they're PL, but sometimes these forms can be a bit pesky because you're like, is that an infinitive of emphasis? Is that a command? Is that a perfect? And so you have to kind of pay attention to context. The participles are kind of fun. So the participles of the PL and the hifial and the heat PL are all going to have a mem prefix at the beginning. And they're just going to change out what vowel is with this mem prefix. In the PL, what you're looking for is a mem with a sheva. So we can already see from the imperfect that it likes these shevas before it's with its prefixes. So here again, in the participle, the active participle, we're getting midaber, midaberet, midabreem, midabrot. So we're getting this m prefix. And then in the rest of the form, we're getting our characteristic dogish, we're getting our characteristic tsere when possible. So it's got this very recognizable shape. So watch out for these mems with dogish. Sorry, these mems with sheva. Okay? So this is the full chart. So what we're going to be working on in this chapter is learning to recognize these and learning to make these. So this is what this chapter is all about. On the next page, they basically just go through and remind you of what to look for. So the most important characteristic of the PL is this dogish in the second root letter. However, as we know, if there's a guttural letter in the middle, it can't take dogish, so funky things will happen. They're going to show you some examples of this on the next page. In the perfect, we see that there's usually an E vowel in the first syllable. In the imperfect, we've seen that the prefixes are taking a sheva or a reduced vowel. In the participles, we're seeing this mem with a sheva underneath it. So they just go through those things again. Thankfully, there's no passive participle you need to worry about here. It's only active participles. So debear, siper, bikesh, they're basically going to look like this. Now, on this next page, they basically show you some of the annoyance that can happen if you have a word which has a weak letter or which has a guttural letter hanging around. So what's going on with Birech? So the problem with Birech is it's got this resh in the middle, and the resh isn't going to want to take the characteristic dagish of the PL. So you can see that instead of getting birachti, birachta, biracht, they've given us beirachti, beirachta, beiracht with tsere vowels. As we've seen so often with verbs, this tsere vowel is here to tell us something is missing that should be here. We see this happen with first week verbs like yashav, which becomes eshev, teshev, teshvi, tsere, tsere, right? Where the tsere is signaling, hey, we've lost our first week root letter. We've seen this with the preposition mean when it attaches to a word that starts with a guttural, and so you can't put a dagish in that letter to show that the nun has been assimilated. So you get me harim, from mountains. So this is the same thing. This tsere is the vowel is lengthening into a tsere to tell you something happened. So we get beirachti, beirachta, beiracht, beirech, beircha, beirachnu, beirachtem, beirachten, beirchu, beirchu. Right? So here you really have to watch the vowel pattern so that you know what's going on. In the imperfect, it's fairly easy to recognize what's going on because you can see the shevas under the prefixes. You can see that this clearly is not a pa'al vowel pattern. So you get avarech, tivarech, tivarachi, because you can't put that dagish in that resh. Now, the tziva is also another verb that shows up pretty much only in the PL, and it's very annoying because it's both second week and third week. So what they've done here is they've actually kind of strengthened their second week root letter here, and then the third hey just does what third hey verbs do. We already learned how third hey verbs work in the pa'al. We already know that if you have haya, for example, it becomes hayiti, hayita, hayit, haya, hayta, hayinu, hayitem, hayiten, hayu, hayu. We know that that final hey will turn into a yod most of the time. In the third feminine singular, it turns into a tav. In the third person plural, when you're adding a vowel after it, it will just drop altogether. We know all that. So this third hey is going to do the same thing in the PL. So for example, here we get civiti, civita, civit, civa, civta, civinu, civitem, civiten, civu, civu, right? So what you're looking at here, you may look at this and be like, is that a Vav Shurek? Is this C-U-E-T? No. Unfortunately, this is the consonantal Vav, the V, with a dagish in it, showing it has been doubled by the PL. So it looks quite funky. But at least it's still there. You still at least get the root letter. So civiti, civita, civit. In particular, these forms down here are fun. It looks like tsiuu, but you know it can't be that, right? So this is tsivu, tsivu. In the imperfect, these look pretty okay for the most part. Um, let's see, is there anything else I want to point out here? You can see that in the participle, we're still getting our m with our sheva at the beginning, regardless of the weirdness going on in the root. So we can still pretty easily recognize these as PL participles. Because why else would you have a m with a sheva at the beginning of a word? It's pretty unusual. In the command forms, note particularly the tsav and tsavu. Unfortunately, tsav is super, super common in biblical Hebrew. So order somebody to do something. When God, for example, is passing on to a prophet or to a king that he wants this person to tell the people to do something, there's a lot of tsav in there. Um, so watch out for that one. Maybe give it its own entry on your flashcard. Okay. So as you can see, weird stuff can happen if you have a guttural letter in the middle of your PL verb that can't accept the characteristic dagish. You get this vowel lengthening the way we got with berech. If you have a third hey, it's going to do what third heys do. But siva in particular is doing this weird thing where it's keeping its second weak root letter and just strengthening it with a dagish. Is there anything else to remark on here? The last thing here is um, third hey verbs in the PL, just like third hey verbs in the pa'al, have clipped forms. So the third hey will be clipped off in the PL. So your clipped form would be Vayetsav, and he ordered. So if your imperfect is Yitzaveh, your clipped form is Vayetsav. Does that make sense? So watch out for that. Okay, if you have any questions on this, feel free to email me, but hopefully that will get you through with chapter 23 and the 5 basic binyanim. See you next time.